Obviously, we're at the beginning of something. I don't expect you to know where it's gonna go, but I believe we might be on to something. And I just thought maybe you should know. I've been playing out a lot of hypotheticals in my mind. I've been writing your name down next to mine. Been imagining all the things you and I could do. I've seen all the possibilities in my dreams. You're alone when you should really be next to me. Baby, let's not wait and see. Immediate action isn't necessary. It's a fatal attraction.
So, I say that like I have something to follow it up with. No, it's time for Ask or Tell Me Anything. That means I have no guests today. I have no topics. I have no clue. There are a lot of things I don't have. But I've got you, maybe, presumably listening. You might call up 888-720-9677. 888-720 WNPR. Your question does not have to be hypothetical, but it could be. The best question, first of all, you don't have to ask a question. You could just get something off your chest. You could tell us something. Or you could ask a question. I would prefer questions that I know the answer to, if at all possible. So, for example, questions about me. I tend to know the answers to those questions, but I may know the answers to other questions as well. Anyway, it's all in your lap. 888-720-9677. 888-720 WNPR. I should say that I was off last week. Mainly because, like a lot of companies, we have a policy here where you have to burn up some of your vacation time, and I kind of had neglected to take very much vacation during the year. We're coming to the end of the fiscal year, and so I took this time off. And it's odd. It's odd, too, because I think doing a daily radio show it's sort of different from a lot of other jobs, and it's hard to take time off from it. I mean, partly because it's fun and stimulating, but also because... I don't know, because that's the main reason it's hard to take time off, because it's fun and stimulating. But then when you do take time off, because you're so used to the dailiness of a radio show like this, it's very hard to turn your mind off and stop thinking about things like a daily radio show host would. But I think I was pretty successful until Friday, sort of late Thursday, early Friday. The verdict, I don't have to say which verdict, that verdict came out, and I was just thinking, well, I was kind of put on earth to talk about stuff like this. It was making me a little bit restless. But mostly I did a good job of not thinking very much about the radio show. I'm back now. I am attempting to figure out what it is that this radio show is or does. And I'm hoping that you will help me out too. I think actually we're heading into this very fraught period. There almost should be... Well, I could backtrack for just a second and say I've been thinking all day about humming, and I think we're going to do a show about humming. I actually probably am a more prolific hummer than, I'm just going to say, 95% of the population, and so I think humming is kind of interesting, and of course it occurs in music. There are some instances in so-called serious music where it happens. And of course there's the Crash Test Dummies. There's Kid Cudi, who does a lot of humming. So I'd like to do a show that it's a little bit about musical humming, but also about other kinds of humming, including there's certain animals. I think there's a thing called the midshipman fish that hums. And sometimes people think there's something going on, but it's just the fish. I think it does. I think it hums for mating purposes. And then there are things like the Taoist hum, this kind of unplaceable noise that people can hear, but they don't know where it is. And I think we are actually having some kind of collective hum that has started pretty recently. This hum in the back of our minds, in the back of our souls, about what is going to happen to this country, what will happen in the ensuing months. what kind of country will we have, say, in early December or possibly early February of next year? And it's not something you want to think about all the time, but it is this kind of constant hum in the back of our minds, like maybe we're in some kind of fairly significant danger. Um, and and so, I mean, that's maybe not the most uplifting thought to have at the beginning of the show, but I think we should recognize that hum, because you really don't want to think about it all the time, but you also, it's there all the time. You feel it. We are in a very weird situation right now. And it's one that could resolve relatively amicably, although that's very unlikely. There's kind of two major possibilities. One of them is that Joe Biden wins the White House back, in which case you will see stuff that probably will make 2021 look pretty mild. And the other is that Donald Trump wins the White House, in which case, I don't know. I don't even know what to think about that. But maybe somebody else does. The number is 888-720-9677, 888-720-WNPR. We're going to begin with Lake Como Dave, the famous Lake Como Dave. Welcome. You're on the air.
Hi, Colin. Welcome back from vacation. I'm breaking my rule not to call in twice in a row, but, the hum, you're talking about Kurt Vonnegut's concept of the existential hum. It's in the back of our head, no matter what we're doing, where we are. It never quite goes away. It's the stuff we're worried about. And so, yeah, it's a good point. Just called in because of the news, everything, the conviction, all that. And I'm getting a little upset with people who are saying, oh, we can't jail Trump because his supporters will rise up with violence and, any thousand variations on that. What if we had back in colonial times, counseled, don't send the king a Declaration of Independence. They might attack us. Yeah. Well, you gotta be ready to stand up, at such times. If there's going to be violence, it's going to happen sooner or later in the current situation. We can't live in fear, is what I think.
Yeah, no, I agree with you up to a point about that. I mean, I think that would be the wrong reason not to jail Trump. I think there are two principles in competition with each other in this situation that don't have anything to do with possible violent reprisals. And one of the principles is, yes, nobody is above the law. However, this kind of case would be adjudicated, whatever sort of sentencing structure would take place for somebody who, committed a crime like this one. And there's some subjective factors that enter into it, but almost all the subjective factors work against Trump. He has not shown any remorse. And he's shown the opposite of remorse, and he has not given any indication that there would not be a threat of recidivism if you get the opportunity. So things like that, those things argue for possibly, a jail sentence. But ideally, yeah, you want to follow the law, you want to follow procedure. Judge Merchan, I think, did a really good job of that during the trial. Obviously, in many ways, he bent over backwards to help Trump, or at least to avoid putting Trump in a jail cell after violations of gag orders. I mean, obviously, if you're on trial, if you're a criminal defendant, you go out in public, some kind of public venue, and you, in a way that gets noticed, refer to your judge as corrupt. And then he, the next day, cautions you not to do it again, and you do it again right away. See how fast you wind up in jail. You will wind up in jail way faster than Donald Trump, who didn't at all. But, basically, you want to follow the rules. You want to have, you don't want to treat Trump any more roughly or more punitively than you would a typical defendant. Now, the other side of that is, and I think it's a thing worth, palpating a little bit, is one of the things that we have privileged kind of over the course of our history is political activity. The idea that in a free society, political activity ought to go on in as unimpeded a way as possible. And you can see that in various, you can see ways that it plays out. I mean, for example, you can say things in a political commercial that you can't say. You can say things in a Mitt Romney commercial that you can't say in a Colgate toothpaste commercial. You can lie. You can do almost anything in a campaign commercial, because we as a society say, you know what, political speech is different from other speech. We want it to be as free as possible because that's part of the DNA of a free society. So, I think for Merchan, even as he said during the trial or prior to the trial, you're this guy's running for president, we're going to try not to curtail his political opportunities too much because that's something that we put a value on. So that's the one that's in competition with just saying, you know what, if he's that kind of defendant, he should go to jail. Anyway, go ahead.
There's another school of thought on that, though, because there are a number of commentators who think that, if there is some kind of even a cursory or, just as a lesson to other people who might do this, if there is some kind of a jail sentence that Judge Merchan, who is a magnificent jurist, by the way, that he may tack on some additional time based on those violations of the gag order that he didn't act on. He has to calculate it really carefully, but I know that he loathes to put politics into his calculation, but he's if he does sentence him in terms of the timing and the length of it, it is going to have to take into account the schedule, between now and the election. But I just don't think that you can just let him go with, just a slap on the wrist and don't do it again, because he will do it again.
I think the middle ground is probably some kind of home arrest, home detention, ankle bracelet stuff. I mean, by the time he gets to that second debate, he might have an ankle bracelet on.
Yeah,
I think probably. I mean, I'm an unreliable narrator because I was sort of thinking hung jury. I was thinking probably not going to get convictions out of this. And then I sat there and watched 34 consecutive felony guilty verdicts. And I thought, well, what do I know anyway? And the truth is, you never do know. I mean, I always tell people, if you're not sitting at a trial, if you're not sitting at pretty much every minute of a trial or most of the minutes of a trial, you don't know what's happening in court. And obviously, we don't have cameras in this court. We didn't get to see stuff like that. But if you don't watch a trial and see all the little things that go on and see the tonal shifts and stuff like that, you probably don't know what's going to happen. But, Dave, I sort of think, Merchan's easy way out, if it's an easy way out, would be something like home detention, ankle bracelet, that kind of stuff, which, is not a great look.
That's true. Well, yeah, that is a good point, the ankle bracelet, because even though it'll give him something more to rant about, we just can't be afraid of him ranting, and we can't be afraid of, keep in mind, my last thing, I know you got other callers, is that there has to be some deterrent value with the number of people, January 6th, violent people who have been sentenced to long sentences and been convicted, even if they have a short sentence. That has to make some of these people think, a lot of these people went away, and aren't going to be seen for a while. Do I really want to take that risk? I don't know. Yeah.
Well, on that ominous note, one way to, split the difference also would be ankle bracelet, but he has to wear it on his neck. So it's more visible, And I guess that would make it a neck bracelet, not an ankle bracelet. All right, here's Martin from the People's Republic of Mansfield. Martin, welcome. You're on the air.
Well, hello, Colin. Thank you for taking my call once again. Always enjoy your show.
Good to have you.
And thank you once again. Yeah, the Mutual Appreciation Society is in order. So anyway, I did actually want to follow up a little bit on your previous caller. It's not just about, at least in my opinion, it's not just about what's happening with this person, this defendant. It's what happens next. Because this person was not the first. It has built. We know it's been building for a while. And if society says, well, it's okay, and we can just give him an ankle bracelet, what's going to happen with the next one? It's going to push the ball down the road even more. We are really in a existential crisis. That if we allow, if the courts, and we all know that Donald Trump wants to push this to the Supreme Court, his appointed Supreme Court. If that court decides that a president who, in their view, has the same political values as they do, is allowed to do whatever he wants, then that really sets the bar for the next time. And the next time will be worse if we allow this to happen. That is Donald Trump is not the most scary thing. The next guy who says, yeah, Donald Trump was the man, the MAGA man, the next guy who takes it even farther is the worst nightmare we can have. And that's why we all have to take a step back and say, no, we cannot allow this to happen.
I don't disagree with you. I mean, it's a tricky thing, and you don't want to turn him into, to use an analogy that he's apparently fond of, the kind of MAGA Nelson Mandela. You don't want him to become a symbol because he's imprisoned, because he's detained, a symbol of the repression of a certain set of ideas.
I had a very great conversation with someone yesterday who made that very, very same point, and this is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
That should we have a constitutional amendment that said, if you have been convicted of a felony, you cannot? Well, that actually would have meant that Mandela would not, in our society, would not have able to be a candidate for presidency in South Africa. And do we want to do that?
Right.
And it's a really messy thing about democracy, but we have to be really aware of that mess.
Right. I mean, you can be a felon and run for president in the USA.
You can be in jail.
You can be in jail. You can be anything. Yeah.
You can be serving a life
as long as you're not foreign born and you hit the age limit. Yeah. No, I mean there aren't any restrictions of that kind.
That is something. Yes, our Constitution has incredibly loose restrictions on some very important things.
It's like they didn't think about it that much or something, and we never got the amendment. Yeah, I just want to quickly say about SCOTUS. The Supreme Court, if they were to try to intervene in the New York case, the case where he was just found guilty, they would have to wait for the appeal process to stop in New York. So that means it goes to an intermediate appellate court next, assuming Trump's appealing, which I think even though he's not very appealing, I think we know he will appeal. And then it would presumably go to New York State's highest court. But although the highest court could also refuse to hear a further appeal, at which point it would be eligible for some kind of interference, if that's the right word, by the Supreme Court. And then, of course, as I think you might have been referencing, the whole question of his immunity is already sitting before the Supreme Court. I actually think in the case of the immunity thing, I could be wrong about this, too. I could be wrong about everything. I don't think there's 5 votes for immunity. I think there's 3 votes for slowing this down so much that it impedes the Florida case, that it impedes the January 6th case. We should let some other callers get on the air. I have some stuff I want to say about this, but I also don't want to get in the way of the calls. So let's go to Ruth and Sandy Hook. We've also got the famous Iman and William from Manchester, or Middletown or someplace. It's Middletown. But here's Ruth from Sandy Hook. You have the floor. Except that I haven't done the thing that would allow you to have the floor. I don't know. I still haven't got used to the software. There you are. Now you have the floor.
All right. So good afternoon, and thank you for taking my call. And I do absolutely love your show and try and listen every single solitary day. I would like to continue on this unfortunate theme of what to do with this guilty man when you've got the entire Republican Party, including someone like Susan Collins, that needed to come out and say this was a terrible thing and it's, shouldn't have happened, and what are we doing to Trump? Well, at the same time, we have Biden's son going before the whatever it is because of a gun violation. I thought we loved guns. I can't even believe that, except that it was Biden's son. So it is scary. It's scary when you've got people saying, hey, you got to go to the Supreme Court. What are you talking about? The Supreme Court isn't going to interfere. Somebody should interfere. It should be Garland, who of course won't. But anyway, when you have so many people on one side that are saying things like this illegal, horrible thing that we're doing to Trump, who has just been violating every single law there is to violate. I mean, it is scary about what's going to go forward, and it isn't even. Although it's pretty important that Trump have some kind of punishment, because when you don't do what the laws say, then it just continues. It's like when you let Richard Nixon, just go home and say, I'm not guilty, whatever, and the VP gives him immunity. It backfires, as you need to follow the law. And I think that whatever the justice said, I would be happy with whatever it was. And I think we need to have Trump have consequences for his horrendous violations of every single law that has been, out there.
I mean, I think the difference between Trump and Nixon is an interesting one, and I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it. But the truth was, Ford pardoned Nixon, but
Right.
but I think Nixon was thoroughly and fully stigmatized. By the end of Watergate, first of all, it wasn't, sort of a dichotomous partisan understanding of what happened. There obviously were some Republican holdouts, but for the most part, the important people within the Republican Party realized what Nixon had done and why he had to go. And there was, I think, also more of a collective understanding of shame in this country, and that Nixon had done shameful things. And that he really couldn't be the kind of post-presidency public figure that he otherwise would have been, that he was damaged goods. I mean, not completely damaged goods, and he could write a book here and there, but
Right.
I think with Trump, there isn't even any kind of bipartisan understanding of what's happening here, why it's wrong. There's just a constant drumbeat of failure to acknowledge reality. It's being carried over even as we speak. Tony Fauci is in front of a congressional committee. They're asking him all kinds of bizarre questions that have no correspondence to reality whatsoever. And to me, that's the scary part. This is really different from Nixon because there's almost nothing that the majority of us that could do or say that wouldn't keep, say 40% of us or 35% of us or whatever it is, keep them beating the other drum saying, no, this is unfair. He's the only viable person to lead this country. And that's what's scary about this environment. I mean, you and I were, I think, both sort of conscious human beings during Watergate. This is different. It just feels really, really different. Anyway, I'm going to take a quick break. Iman, don't go away. You're on to something important. William from Middletown, also please stay with us. The rest of you can call in 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Happy to talk to you. We'll be back.
Lay it all down, search party for a noun, while they run around, little vowels on the playground, hands outstretched for a sip, just a drip, one small taste of the missing adjective.
That's Caroline Shaw, who in a perfect world would be a guest on our humming show. By the way, the maestro, Dylan Reyes, says that I hum. I always forget that Dylan actually keeps his microphone open into his studio before we go on the air. So I'm sure he hears me muttering to myself and doing God knows what else. But he says 9 out of 10 times I hum before the show starts. Which is not the reason to do a show about humming, but it is a reason to do a show about humming. All right, so what we're going to do, William, if you could just hang on here for a second. We're not leaving behind this topic, but just because Iman is, kind of a celebrity caller to ask her, tell me anything at this point. By the way, the number, 888-720-9677, 888-720-WNPR. We're just going to put her on. And then William and Lily are both in line also to speak. So, Iman, you have the floor.
Hi. Can I just say that every time you say, like, I'm a celebrity, I blush furiously. So I'm just letting you know.
Well, that won't make me stop.
Okay. But I wanted to talk about, the way that you sometimes solicit women, female callers.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed in the last show, I think you said, I'm asking for XX callers.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, normally you've done women. And I was just curious, what your thinking is.
Like, why I would make that affirmative effort? Or why?
Oh, no, I get why you're making the effort. It's a well-intentioned effort. I'm not someone who wants to be the word police, but I'm not convinced that you're using the right words.
I'm probably not using the right words. We can start there. Yeah, I mean, I switched over to XX because we had a caller who was named Danielle, and I jumped to the conclusion that Danielle was a woman. Danielle,
yep, I heard that.
Yeah. So that sort of chastened me. So I thought XX chromosome. That's not it either. I rely on you 100%.
Okay.
I have such trust in you. So I know you won't mislead me. What should I be saying?
Okay, so I would just say, like, XX1, it's like you don't really know what anyone's chromosomes are. You don't know what my chromosomes are. I know you think I'm a woman. I do identify as a woman, but, like, people are born intersex and all that stuff.
Yep.
People are trans, so, like, their voices may even sound different on the phone than what you think, So
Yep.
it's just like, so really what I think you could do is, like, let's say you have a show and you feel like you're hearing mostly from men, like cisgender male callers. You could just say, like, I want to hear from, like, a diversity of genders. I want to hear from a bunch of different people who I haven't really heard from. And I think people will get, like, you're probably talking about women, but, like, trans people, non-binary people might also then feel included to be like, oh, and he wants to hear from me. And that could be a good thing.
I will do this because you've never steered me wrong before.
Okay.
I don't particularly have to do it today because I think we have a fairly diverse group of callers. But yeah, when it comes up next time, I will do this.
Okay.
And even if it just turns out to be a disaster, I will not blame you. It will never come up between us. I will never mention it. All right, because I think overall we've had a very, very productive and fruitful relationship so far.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for calling.
You.
Okay. Bye. All right then. So I guess maybe. Well, no. William's been waiting a long time. I think we're going to put William on, then Lily, then we got Todd. We've got room for you too at 888-720-9677. William, you have the floor, or the talking stick, or something like that. You have the talking stick.
I like that diversity of genders. That has a ring to it.
Yeah.
Humming is right before chanting Om, and that is a very relaxing thing. I do that all the time. I love chanting Om. But anyway, back to the reason that I was calling. What upsets me a lot regarding this verdict and all of the noise around it is how our judicial system is not being defended by anybody. They're talking about the quality of the verdict and all this stuff, and all over the years, the judicial system has made some decisions that I didn't always agree with. I mean, a lot of controversy, but people always kind of said, you know what, in America we have this, it's not perfect, but we have these people who make a decision, and it's unique. I was talking to my son about this, and I was saying, in all the world, I think this is a pretty unique system that we have, and people like the Speaker Johnson saying what he has been saying about the judicial system, I think, is really reprehensible. And I'd like to see some notable politicians, preferably Democrat, defend it.
I'm amazed that Mike Johnson can say anything at this point, at least about on any of these topics, because here he is, Mr. Hyper Christian, hyper marriage, conventional heterosexual marriage, and here he is. I mean, the underlying facts of this case are things that should really bother him, and instead he's troubled by what you're talking about. And I agree with what you're saying too. I think one of the problems with Americans, and maybe people in general, is we tend to be more interested in results than we are in process. So if you get the results you want, then it's a good system. If you don't, it's a bad system. You're talking about process, and I think you're right to do so. And to me, the miracle of this system is right there in that Thursday verdict, where you've got 12 people. They went through a voir dire process, which means that Trump's lawyers had an opportunity to, on a peremptory basis, disqualify some of them, or disqualify some of them, strike them for cause. So, I mean, Trump's defense team and the prosecution had a hand in assembling this panel of 12 more or less ordinary citizens who took this job very seriously. And we know that one of those people on the jury was a Truth Social user. But everybody on the jury, I think, paid attention to what this case was about, and came to a unanimous verdict. And to denigrate it, to throw shade on it, to cast asparagus on it, I think is, to your point, not only insulting to our system, which is a flawed, but it's like what Churchill said about democracy. It's the worst possible system until you consider all the other possible systems. And that's sort of our criminal justice system as well. But yeah, I mean, respect must be shown, and respect must be shown for these 12 citizens and 6 alternates who have now, put themselves in harm's way. They might get doxxed and stuff like that. They took their job very seriously, and doing anything that doesn't salute their effort and their seriousness, I think, is kind of, to use a Mike Johnson kind of phrase, kind of un-American. So I'm with you, William.
Thanks.
All right, we're going to move on to Lily. Here's Lily from West Hartford, not to be confused with Lily Tyson, who is the senior producer of the Colin McEnroe Show, and is producing this particular episode. So Lily, you got to talk to another person named Lily. I don't know whether she was entirely clear about that, however.
No, I guess not.
No.
But,
No.
Nice. And it feels like a sort of high synchronicity opportunity to call in, since I am a non-XX chromosome woman, and I also enjoy chanting, including humming, as a part of meditation. So I'm fitting right in. But,
yes, you are. You're the perfect caller for this show.
I had a story about the time I ran into Kurt Vonnegut, who was mentioned way, way, way back at the beginning.
Go, do it. I have some too, but let's hear yours.
So he was walking out of the tobacco store, as he often did.
Of course.
And I was walking up the sidewalk, not really being entirely mindful of my surroundings, as I often was as a youth at that time. And I literally ran into him, and I sort of reeled and turned and saw what I had done and said, "Oh my gosh, excuse me, Mr. Vonnegut." "Watch it, kid," he replied. The end.
That was I sort of feel like, in a way, Vonnegut, because he had this kind of curmudgeon reputation, he kind of felt like he had to live it too.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to spend a good portion of a day with him. We were doing a Connecticut forum. It was him, Joyce Carol Oates, and Jennifer Weiner. And so when you do the forum, it starts sort of in the middle of the afternoon, and you go to various meetings with the panel. And one of the things you do typically is interact with high school journalists. So here we are, we're interacting with all these high school journalists. And one of them asks Vonnegut some question. I can't remember what the question was. And, in typical Kurt fashion, he went, "Well, I think humankind is a syphilis on the face of the planet, and the sooner we're expunged, the better off the planet's going to be." And these are like all these 17-year-old kids, and you can see their little faces fall and stuff. And I was sort of standing sort of behind him, next to Joyce, and she turned to me and she said, "Kurt says these things, and it's almost as if he expects somebody to object to them, but then nobody ever does." And I said, "Well, when we get on stage, why don't you do that?" And Joyce Carol Oates is a very barbed wit. So we went out on stage, and like every time Vonnegut talked, she, in a very funny way, would kind of slap him back. And he initially seemed very put off by this. It's like, because nobody ever, she's right, nobody ever does it. And then finally gets sort of thought, hey, this could be fun. And they just went at it like the Bickersons for the rest of the evening in a way that was very entertaining. So, you probably could have said something, made some chippy remark back to him. He might have even liked it.
In a different slice of the universe's bread, perhaps I did.
Right. The wit of the staircase, of course, as the French say. All right, Lily, thanks so much for your call. Probably the other Lily Tyson, and the Maestro would be happy if I went to a break right now. Why don't we do that? We've got Todd from Naugatuck, who will be the first caller when we get back. So let's take that break. We'll come back.
A slip like April wine right through your fingers. So kiss me sweet till our secret star illuminates the way to Shangri-La. Whatever fate may befall, all I know is that the gift of love is the greatest gift of all. The gift of love is the greatest gift of all. The gift of love is the greatest gift of all.
All episodes of The Colin McEnroe Show are available 24/7 at ctpublic.org/Colin, which is also where you can sign up for our delightful free fortnightly newsletter, The Noseletter. You can listen to any episode on any podcast app. Have a question or comment? Email us at colinshow@ctpublic.org. Now, back to the show.
Thanks, Sabrina. And thanks also to the Maestro, Dylan Reyes, and to our senior producer, Lily Tyson, who has taken it upon herself to produce this particular episode. She's the person screening the calls. I think we're having a very successful Ask Her Tell Me Anything. The number, by the way, because we have time left and space left, 888-720-9677, 888-720-WNPR. Let's inaugurate the new Iman era and just say we welcome all genders. And even if you just don't even really feel like you have a gender or you want to talk about a gender, think about if you're gender negative, I don't know. Is anybody that? I'm just digging myself a hole right now, obviously. But anyway, anybody can call up. And the one thing we don't want is just for one type of person to call up. We want for lots of types of people to call up. I hope I did that right. Okay, so right now we're talking specifically to a type of person named Todd, who is in Naugatuck, the place that gave us the wonderful hide. So Todd, you have the floor.
Hi, Colin. Yeah, thanks for taking my call. I appreciate your show. If I talk a little quickly, it's because I'm nervous calling into a radio show.
Don't be nervous. Don't be nervous. You're just talking to a friend right now.
All right, thanks. I just want to just push back a little bit on sort of the anxiety. Everybody talking about, there'll be violence in society, that there'll be this uprising, this collective thing if Trump is prosecuted. And I just don't believe it. I just think that these people really, when you boil it down, are such snowflakes, and they just melt when you apply a little bit of heat to them. When you see with these J6 people and everything that happened with them, they just fold in court, they cry. And I also don't know whether you agree with the polling that's out there right now, but I just can't believe that they're, Biden and Trump are neck and neck. I just don't see it. I mean, he didn't win the popular vote last time. He didn't even really come that close in the Electoral College. So I almost feel like, especially, now that we're in the judicial system with the court hearing, that, that they're weighing, like, the consequences of putting a genuine criminal in jail against just this seething out there in society. I mean, you look at the court case in New York, no one showed up for Trump. I mean, they had the availability to be out there on the street. Nobody showed up. Mm-hmm. So just thinking about what you're saying as far as the humming, and I feel like this tremendous anxiety that's building towards this election. And just one more quick thing. I'm white male, cisgender, but I really do believe if there were more women involved in politics, it would be a much better world. But also, I just have to say, like years ago, I just happened to walk into a Barnes & Noble, and there was Ralph Nader and talking about a book. It was a million years ago. And as far as the grievance politics that are going on right now, and that's what it is politics of grievance, and Trump is capitalizing on that. There is some basic, valid grievance there, and that all of the offshoring of jobs. I said to Ralph Nader, I said, what do you think about where there was a brass mill where there was jobs and, skilled jobs, and now it's a brass mill mall, And what his take on it was, well, did you ever think that your own government would be like offshoring government contracts for manufacturing and stuff like that? I mean, coming from Naugatuck, I can tell you, home of Naga Hide, also Agent Orange, and, that, the deleterious effect that it's had. All these jobs first went to Ohio, then to Mexico, and then went overseas. So the Democratic Party would do well to address that basic grievance. That might be legitimate on the Trump People's Party. I can't even believe I'm saying that.
No, I think you're right to say it, and I think it's good that you're saying it, and I think you're geographically in the right place to say it too. Look, there's two places in Connecticut where Trump gets significant support. One of them is kind of the second district, just floating around out in eastern Connecticut, and there's just all kinds of unusual people out there. But the other place is kind of Route 8. Naugatuck Valley, starting at Waterbury at the least, and then proceeding south. That is a hotbed of Trump voting.
Big time.
And I think it's largely for the reasons that you're talking about, or maybe the second or third generation of the reasons that you're talking about, which is dwindling economic opportunities, people who are easily attracted to a grievance-based rhetoric and ideology because of all those economic opportunities that either got offshored or became outmoded and weren't replaced effectively with new kinds of jobs and a new kind of economy. And you're absolutely right that the more that Democrats and Biden specifically can do to address that in a meaningful way that's not just talk, the better they're going to do. And I just want to say the thing that you said about the polling too. I mean, so I've spent just this absurd amount of a large percentage of my career trying to understand polling and understand it better, and particularly over the last, sort of the Nate Silver era of American life, I really kind of doubled down on trying to understand it. I think this is a really weird polling situation because, first of all, we're really talking about tiny slivers of people who could be meaningful. I mean, not slivers of individual people, but I mean, there's 20,000 people in Wisconsin who probably could have a major impact on the election depending on which way they break, and you could take that idea and turn it over to Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Ohio, whatever you think the meaningful tippable states are. You're talking about pretty small numbers. If you could change, it's really kind of five figures. If you can change 20, 30,000 votes in a state, you can really, it's very possible to change the outcome there. So I think it's hard to poll for that, because you will get these things that look like deadlocks. And it's not so much that they're deadlocks or that it's a tie, but there's a stalemate. The whole thing kind of is locked up kind of tight. And it really will be probably affected over the short haul. I mean, I also think polling isn't terribly meaningful pre-national conventions and maybe even until after Labor Day. I'll be more interested in the polls that are actually put in the field after Labor Day to see where people are now, because this is also, maybe more than even most presidential cycles, a cycle with a real narrative attached to it. So that narrative is kind of playing out in different ways that we've been talking about on the show here so far. And that may affect votes more than you typically see them be affected. We know that the MAGA people are kind of hardened off. We know that the people who are appalled by the MAGA people are hardened off. So who are the people in that soft center and what are they going to do? And, good luck polling on that.
Yeah, I just can't believe that Trump is actually, the hardened base, like you referred to, I can't believe he's actually, it might be, being shaved off around the edges, but I don't see it growing. It's not a movement. It's not a juggernaut. It's just a static, angry base of grievance and unchanging. So, I'm optimistic in that. I keep talking myself back from, the squeaky wheel gets all the oil, and they're paying so much attention to this malignant narcissist. And it just is occupying all of the media, which of course is squeezing commercials in between it and making money. I just don't see it as a very legitimate thing. It's just a cult, really. When you get down to a super dangerous cult. I'll get off the phone now, but would encourage your listeners to the perspective of Anthony Bourdain did a show where he was in Italy and he opened it with Benito Mussolini looking right into the camera and saying, "Make Italy great again." And it was just so scary. I mean, he led that country straight into ruin. So thank you. Thank you for the show.
Yeah, I also did a Connecticut forum with Anthony Bourdain. That was very interesting as well, but I won't talk about that. All right, so we have a few minutes left. I don't have a call on the board right now. I just kind of maybe say a little bit more about what he was just talking about, because one of the things that concerns me in general about life in America is its progressive atomization. We are just divided in not just politically, but we are divided into smaller groups by the way we consume culture. Every year, in fact, I think it'll be next week, we do a show about the song of the summer. There's always kind of a putative song of the summer, one song released in a given year that really seems to be the one that people will remember about that summer, be the one that makes people get up at a wedding in, Labor Day weekend or something, get out on the dance floor because everybody knows this, everybody knows Blurred Lines or something. They're going to get out and dance. But it's harder and harder for us to do this every year because the culture is broken into smaller pieces. And we don't all listen to the same stuff. We don't even, listen to the same possible 20 candidates so we know which one of those 20, we think it is. And that's, I think, happened more and more in lots of other spheres. And it obviously not exactly what's happening in politics, although I think with, if RFK plays a significant role in the race and maybe Cornel West and Jill Stein, and I mean, it could happen a little bit there. But what happens generally is a long tail phenomenon, what they in economics and marketing call a long tail. And the way that I've always thought about a long tail for the last 10, 15 years is that it really runs off enthusiasm. So, if you think about the long tail, the example that I always give is you're better off, this is the small ball example, but let's say you've got to put a book out. Okay. You're better off if you have 17,000 people who care passionately about you and have a really high level of enthusiasm about your work than if you have 170,000 people who are kind of aware of you and know about you and, recognize your name and maybe they know something about you or they saw you on TV or whatever. You're better off if you got 17,000 people who will drive through a snowstorm to a book signing that's 75 miles away. That's kind of the way systems like this work better. And so one of the reasons that I'm not complacent about Trump and about the MAGA movement is that they're like that, in a way that is not true, I think, about Biden supporters who basically think Biden's a pretty good president, maybe even a good president, and certainly a, vastly desirable, more desirable commander-in-chief than Donald Trump. They don't feel the way that the MAGA people feel about Trump. They have this kind of the Trump people have this very messianic attitude towards him. And everything that happens to him, positive or negative, tends to feed that impression. And so they will drive a long distance. They will, they'll go to 5 rallies and they'll be sure to vote and they'll try to get some other people to vote. And, that's sometimes referred to in politics as the enthusiasm gap. And I do worry about the enthusiasm gap. But I don't worry too much. I want you all to be happy. I want you to have a good week. We have some fun stuff. Percival Everett, author of James, will be in this studio on Wednesday. There's something to look forward to.